Good evening, and welcome as we uncover yet another forgotten case from the archives of the UK's UFO Files. In this episode, we delve into the alleged claim of West Yorkshire Police Constable Alan Godfrey and his close encounter whilst out on patrol in the quiet town of Todmorden during the early hours of the 20th of November 1980. However, this humble police officer's experience is not the only strange occurrence within this truly disturbing case. As many researchers would agree, this is a tale of two halves. Ladies and gents, I invite you to sit back, relax, turn out those lights, and dive in with me as we explore the Todmorden encounter. Welcome to Unnerving Unknown. The following video contains elements some viewers may find distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. Todmorden, a small settlement town buried deep within windswept Pennine moorlands. Obscure and isolated, this quiet location is also the epicenter of UFO activity in the British Isles. A tenth of sightings are reported around this town alone. Alan Godfrey, born in 1950, was serving as a police officer in Todmorden, 30 miles to the west of Tingley, since 1974. At 3:45 p.m. on a wet, rainy afternoon on the 11th of June, 1980, PC Godfrey received a call on his police radio whilst patrolling in his Mark I Ford Escort from long-standing friend and colleague PC Malcolm Agley. Agley himself was in process of responding to a 999 call from a young man named Trevor Parker, the son of the owner of a coal yard named Tomlins. Despite directly neighbouring Todmorden train station, Tomlins was an isolated industrial yard situated at the bottom of a long driveway. Parker had been preparing to load his wagon with coal in lieu of his afternoon deliveries when he stumbled across a man lying atop a 12-foot pile of coal, bordered by large wooden sleepers. By 4:10 p.m, PC's Agley and Godfrey arrived at the scene. The witness was visibly shaken as he directed the two officers to the coal pile. Agley proceeded to clamber up and discovered that the man strewn across the summit was deceased. He called down to Godfrey to come take a closer look and offer a second opinion. Joining Agley at the top, he realised almost immediately why his colleague had called him up to take a look. The body was that of Zygmunt Adamski, who had been missing from his home in Thornfield Crescent, Tingley, near Wakefield, since June 6, 1980, when he set off to buy groceries and didn't return. Born in Poland, 1923, Zygmunt Adamski, known to many as Ziggy, immigrated to England in 1945, aged 22. In 1951, Adamski married a woman named Lakadia Havalska, and for a number of years worked in the local coal mine, the Lofthouse Colliery. And by 1980, the 56-year-old, now nearing retirement age, had applied for early retirement as the Lofthouse Colliery was planned for closure in 1981. Zygmunt felt he could better take care of his wife, who suffered from multiple sclerosis and was wheelchair-bound, without having to bear the long and arduous hours of pit work on his shoulders at the same time. Unfortunately, however, his application was initially rejected, and on top of this, his own health had declined from a heavy smoking habit and a life of hard graft working in the mine. That being said, Adamski had undergone treatment which appeared to be reaping positive results, thus his health didn't appear to hold too many negative effects over his ability to live a normal and contented life. In the days prior to his disappearance, Zygmunt was in preparation to give his daughter away at her wedding, and was playing host to two family members who had travelled in from Poland especially. On the morning of June 6th, Adamski and his cousin ventured out to nearby Wakefield for a bout of shopping, and upon their return home, sat down to lunch together with the family. At approximately 3:45 p.m. the following day, Zygmunt left the home in order to buy groceries in Tingley village. As he walked to his local shop, he met his neighbour and the pair exchanged brief cordial greetings. After momentary pleasantries, Adamski continued on down the street, eventually arriving at said local store, collected his groceries, and set off home once more, never to be seen alive again. Adamski was discovered laid on his back, as if he'd gotten into bed and was fast asleep, as described by P.C. Godfrey. His face bore an expression which could only be noted as absolute terror. Whatever the last thing this unfortunate man had experienced in his final moments was truly terrifying and horrific. As officers Godfrey and Agley inspected the body, a number of peculiarities furthered to the bizarre nature of this finding. Adamski laid strewn atop this pile, with what seemed to have been no plausible way for him to have been placed upon it, without tracks leading to the scene either from Zygmunt himself or someone else involved. Disturbance of coal, as well as Trevor Parker seeing or hearing anyone enter his yard. All of what should have been collected as evidence simply did not exist at this scene. By all accounts, it seemed Adamski was placed carefully and precisely from above. Underneath his suit jacket, which was misbuttoned, he lacked a shirt and was wearing only a string vest. His trousers, unzipped, shoes untied crudely, and Adamski's watch and wallet were nowhere to be found. Stranger still, he was clean, displaying no sign of coal dust or dirt on his face or clothing. Zygmunt's hair had also been cropped short in a roughly cut manner, and though he'd been missing for just over 5 days, Adamski only displayed 1 day's worth of stubble facial growth. Upon further examination, Godfrey discovered something strange behind Adamski's right ear. The injuries noted were a series of burn-like marks around Adamski's crown, nape of the neck, behind the right ear and shoulders that appeared like a chemical burn in several patches. These appeared to have been treated with a green, yellowy substance. At this point, something about the situation didn't sit right with either police officer. It was quite obvious to me and Malcolm that this guy didn't die where he was found. He appeared to have been dressed after death. It was quite steep. I can't imagine anyone carrying a body up there. Why would they? It was very strange. 2 and 2 were making 5. From the outset, the body did not appear to display any initial signs of what could be determined as natural causes. Following procedure, Godfrey called for the Criminal Investigations Department to attend and conduct a more thorough investigation pertaining to suspicions of potential foul play. CID arrived, photographed the scene, and the coroner, James Turnbull, announced life extinct and arranged for the body to be removed from the coal yard and taken to Hebden Bridge for autopsy. Alan Edwards, the consulting pathologist at the Royal Infirmary of Halifax, presided over the autopsy. During post-mortem, it was concluded that Adamski had succumbed to a massive cardiac arrest and died between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. that day. It was found that Zygmunt only had a single day's worth of beard growth and had eaten well during the time in which he was missing. However, this was not the case on the day that he was discovered. Edwards and Turnbull's report also revealed that the burn marks on the nape of the neck, shoulders, and crown were inflicted only 2 days prior to his death. The look of contorted terror on his face, as described by Alan Godfrey, was confirmed to have been a correct prognosis by the coroner. He must have known great fear or incredible agony at the time of his passing. The bizarre gel-like substance applied to these wounds was sampled and taken to a Home Office laboratory in Wetherby for analysis. No records of Zygmunt Adamski attending any local hospitals in the area to receive medical treatment for his injuries ever existed. In the days that followed, the body was finally identified by police via the missing persons records in Wakefield, and from this, the investigation inquest unearthed various facts about Adamski's life, bringing more unanswered questions to the fore. Zygmunt was nothing if not very well liked by the folks around Tingley. He bore no enemies or harboured any ill will towards anyone for that matter, had no financial difficulties or addictive vices that he may turn to in times of hardship. His marriage appeared to be a loving, caring and contented relationship, and in the days leading up to his disappearance, Adamski was in high spirits for the wedding, leaving his family none the wiser to if he was hiding anything. His close friend, Christopher Zielinski, had been in the pub with him on the 4th of June, a couple of days before he vanished. He also remarked that Zygmunt was his usual jovial self, and he left early that evening to head home and take care of his wife. Zielinski described the Adamski's marriage as a happy one, and added that the idea of him disappearing for 5 days voluntarily to leave his ill wife to fend for herself, utterly unthinkable. The only piece of evidence that may have initially pointed in the direction of foul play was the report of a family feud of which led to a restraining order against the husband of Adamski's cousin, of whom was staying with them at the time. The apparent feud was due to the perceived level of Zygmunt's involvement in the wedding, leaving the husband somewhat put out. Regardless, the police investigators were content with the situation and found no evidence to support any link to Adamski's disappearance and later demise. Alan Godfrey later confirmed that there was no reason to suspect the involvement of anyone in the family. The mystery of what occurred to this hard-working, honest, caring family man has been one of debate since the story broke in the tabloids during the weeks following. Whilst police waited on bated breath in hopes that information from the public would steadily flow in, the inquest was adjourned, and hoping for the facts to become clearer during the postponement, the test results from Weatherby Labs returned only to raise more eyebrows, as the gel compound was unidentifiable. Although the investigation had at a dead end amidst the unanswered questions and bizarre nature of this case, what did become apparent was that Zygmunt Adamski had never visited Todmorden ever in his life, nor did he have any family, friends or acquaintances in the town. Therefore, he had no reason or business being there whatsoever. Soon after, with no witnesses or further evidence coming to light, the inquest resumed to conclude with an open verdict. Cardiac arrest causing heart failure was the accepted cause of death, with poor condition of the lungs due to heavy smoking and a hard life of graft in the mines as contributing factors. As time passed and the case was brought to a close, the mystery of Zygmunt Adamski had faded into the background, and everyday normality took hold once more for the residents of Yorkshire. Yet, as the winter months rolled in, and the nights drew longer in the valley, Todmorden and the surrounding areas by this point were garnering a reputation as a renowned UFO hotspot. PC Alan Godfrey's involvement in the Adamski case was later discovered as an unnerving coincidence, as he himself would go on to experience a bizarre encounter of his own. The complexities of this case cannot be uncovered by telling one man's story alone, without including the other in this extraordinarily intertwined tale of two halves. November 28th, 1980, 4:55 a.m. 6 months later, PC Alan Godfrey was on duty in the early hours of a wet and rainy morning in Todmorden, patrolling the streets in his Ford Escort Mark I, as numerous calls came in for him to investigate an odd report by multiple witnesses pertaining to a herd of rogue cows that had been witnessed in one council estate wandering the streets, then disappearing and reappearing in a completely separate area within moments. The hours went by and still no sign of the herd, as Alan's shift was coming to an end. Eventually the rain finally abated, yet a low cloud remained and drifted over the town, adding to a somewhat eerie atmosphere. Godfrey proceeded to drive down Burnley Road toward the direction of the most recent sighting of the herd. He was about to consider giving up his nocturnal hunt and take a right turn onto Fernley Road, which led onto the council estate in question, pertaining to the reported sighting of the herd, and by this point it was 5:10 a.m. and the streets were dead quiet. Rounding the bend, Godfrey caught sight of a bright, luminous object in the road a few hundred yards further up ahead. At first, naturally, he thought it was a bus travelling towards him that took the workers to their jobs in town, but as he approached, he realised that this was something else entirely. The bemused police officer went on to describe in detail. Suspended in mid-air, only a few feet above the road surface, the object was diamond in shape, and the bottom half was spinning at an incredible velocity, hovering so low over the otherwise deserted stretch of road that it was causing the bushes adjacent to violently shake. It was approximately 20 feet wide, 14 feet high, and the top half contained a row of what seemed to be shiny, blacked-out window panels that made up the circumference and was stationary, compared with the separately, rapidly rotating underside of the craft. Godfrey, though stunned and baffled by what he was witnessing, attempted to hail the HQ over both sets of radios he had at his disposal. Firstly, over the Ford's VHF radio. No response. Godfrey then tried his UHF personal radio, and again the same result. As he sat there, Godfrey realised it was eerily silent. This dazzling craft in front of him was not producing any sound. Not wanting to misconstrue what he was seeing, if asked to describe it later, Alan picked up his clipboard and began to roughly sketch the levitating UFO as it whipped up the leaves from the ground, disturbing the brushes, creating a whirling vortex around the rotating base of the craft. As Godfrey continued to sketch the object and observe this spectacle, a sudden, blinding burst of light enveloped him and his patrol car, and the next thing he knew, he was inexplicably driving again, now further along Burnley Road, with no sign of the UFO anywhere. PC Godfrey quickly glanced into his rearview mirror and immediately turned the car around and returned to the sighting location. Examining the spot where the UFO hovered, Godfrey observed that the road was very wet as it had rained heavily earlier in the night. However, there was an odd circular patch where the road had been completely dried in a swirled pattern. Bemused and unsure of what just transpired, PC Godfrey drove straight back into town, returned to the police station, and was met by his colleague, PC Malcolm Agley, the same officer whom responded with Alan to the discovery of Zygmunt Adamski. As Godfrey burst through the front door, Agley noted that
when Alan came into the police station, he was very agitated. At first, you think he's totally outrageous, but I've no reason to doubt him. I mean, I've known him for a long time, and we know each other really well, and I've no reason to doubt what he said.
Agley's initial reaction was that of bemusement, being told such a fantastical account of events. That being said, Agley knew PC Godfrey very well, as he had joined him on numerous call-outs and incidents. PC Godfrey decided to begin preparing the night's report, and looked over to the clock hanging on the wall and realised, unbelievably, that somewhere he had lost around 35 minutes from the point of his encounter to heading back into town. Godfrey, with the aid of Agley, headed back out one last time to try and locate the missing herd of cows, and maybe catch sight of the mysterious craft Alan encountered. Upon returning to Burnley Road, Agley examined the scene for himself, and he too found the spiral swirling pattern in the road a little more than peculiar. He agreed with Godfrey that something had definitely been there and left its mark. PC Godfrey pondered if the object may have entered the adjacent park. The two officers hopped over a locked gate and made their way across the green. By now, the darkness of the night sky had begun to ever so slightly turn a royal blue, improving visibility, and as they neared the rugby pitch, they discovered the missing herd. All amassed in the middle of the pitch, no hoof prints leading to that spot, of which would have been noticeable as it had been raining heavily for the last 2 nights prior. How the herd ended up in that field is still up for debate. Godfrey contacted the farm owner responsible for the missing herd and informed him of the location where they were finally apprehended, so to speak. Clocking off at 6 a.m, a very weary PC Godfrey headed home after what turned out to be a very long and strange night on duty. The following night, upon returning to work, Alan discovered that his account had circulated around the station. As days passed, his story was retold on numerous occasions by his colleagues, and as harmless as the ribbings were, an underlying tone of ridicule was subtly present. Despite this, Alan had thick skin and put it to the back of his mind. He cared not what others thought. He knew what he experienced was very real and was steadfast in that conviction. The following week, however, would provide PC Godfrey with an unwanted surprise as he discovered his story on the front page of the local newspaper. Originally reluctant to make an official report on his experience, Godfrey decided to do so after learning of several other reports of lights in the sky that night. Unfortunately, one of his colleagues, a policeman working the day shift, had seen fit to fill in the local press on the strange events during their usual routine call to the station to collect a rundown of the previous night's event. The story of what was now an official UFO sighting in the eyes of the press was also now in the public domain, aired in much detail for all of Yorkshire to read. Thankfully, the vast majority found this account as a bit of light amusement. There are a small few, however, who took this report very seriously. The story is given credence by the fact that multiple police officers also reported that around 4:40 a.m. on the morning of November 28th, a fast-moving, bright blue object had been seen hovering and moving around in the sky in an area covering at least 30 miles. PC John Porter, accompanied by 2 other officers, were out investigating an open area of the moors for a stolen motorbike when they caught sight of this strange object. The sighting occurred roughly around 15 minutes before Godfrey's own encounter. Along with 2 traffic police officers of Greater Manchester Police, numerous locals also claimed to have sighted the same unidentified object in the sky that night. As the days rolled on, and the other stories of that night were coming to the light in the newspapers, the ridicule and now rather harsh mockery persisted. PC Godfrey continued to endure this not only at the station, but in public as well. The reality of this event became unwantedly bestowed upon not only Godfrey, but much to the embarrassment of the Todmorden Police Department and his family as well. Alan maintains that the department, uncomfortable with his newfound and reluctant notoriety, subtly pressured him to resign through such tactics as replacing his squad car with a bicycle. Godfrey, being a man of principle, integrity, and strong will, held his resolve admirably and tried to move on with his life, as in time he knew that with all things in the press, his story and the backlash surrounding it would die down within a few weeks, give or take, and life would go on. This was wishful thinking, as 1980 would turn out to be the year the UFO phenomena in the United Kingdom would increase exponentially in the press and the media. Eventually, Alan made the decision to retire from the police force, but rather than just sit back, instead, he would spend hours and hours going through the event, trying to understand exactly what had happened. Godfrey's encounter, along with the many other sightings from that night and the witness accounts that were to follow, would create a media storm across the entire decade, and the Todmorden incident was just the catalyst. 1981. Godfrey's hypnotic regression. Amid the wave of heightened UFO activity, Godfrey was contacted a year later by the Chief Inspector of the Fraud Squad for Greater Manchester Police, Norman Collinson, as the recent run of aerial witness sightings led an investigation all the way back to Alan's encounter. The 2 men spoke at great length of the subject. Collinson admitted he himself had a keen interest and asked if PC Godfrey would consent to questioning in regard to his story. Reluctant at first, however, Alan eventually agreed to one of the strangest police interviews he'd ever taken part in, and alongside a solicitor by the name of Harry Harris, as well as another witness to the strange lights in the sky, Mike Sachs, the interview was conducted in Alan Godfrey's home. Impressed and enthralled by his chilling encounter, the 3 investigators managed to piece together a timeline of events in Alan's story and with some digging, managed to discern a 35-minute window of time was missing for Alan. Chief Inspector Collinson made a suggestion to the surprise and apprehension of Godfrey that it may be prudent for him to undergo hypnotic regression in order to retrieve possible lost memory of the missing time. Initially, Alan was dismissive of the idea. He'd only ever seen hypnosis displayed for stage tricks, using willing and susceptible participants who were made fun of at the expense of a paying audience. Regardless, Alan was reassured by Collinson that this method has been used in the past to great effect, gaining clarity and closure for those who have had repressed trauma. Reluctantly persuaded, Godfrey made the bold decision to go ahead and participate, at least to get to the bottom of what really happened at the moment of the blinding flash. The following hypnotic regressions took place under the supervision of not one, but two psychiatrists. One, Professor Blair of Psychiatry at Manchester University, along with Dr. Joseph Jaffe, himself a Manchester-based psychiatrist whom cooperated in cases in conjunction with the Greater Manchester Police on several occasions prior. What must be noted is that from the outset, neither of the two psychiatric professionals were made aware of the exact manner of Alan's experience, only that something occurred a year previously to cause Alan temporary amnesia within a small span of time. Over a number of sessions spanning the course of 3 months, Alan's chilling and disturbing account of what really happened was finally being unravelled with unnerving ramifications. Alan recalls the moment he approached the object in his patrol car, taking in this truly extraordinary spectacle. As with his conscious memory, he tries the forward's VHF radio and his personal radio, of which both pieces of equipment fed back static. What is different this time, in Alan's now revealed subconscious memory, was that he actually had opened the driver's door and stepped out to get a full visual of the object before him. He then notices the beginnings of a light emanating from the underside of the craft, and feels prompted to get back in the Ford, pull out his A4 notepad, and begin immediately sketching the craft. The moment he completed the drawing, Alan looks back to the object, and suddenly that blinding flash of bright immense light envelops his entire field of view. Startled, he braces his eyes with his arms, and can hear for a split second the vortex of leaves emanating from the craft drawing closer to the car, and as suddenly as it came, it was over. The next sequence in Alan's lost memory is a feeling of weightlessness and total blackness. Then, emerging into consciousness and slowly opening his eyes, Alan discovers that he is in a peculiar room. Only, he is not alone. Standing across from him is what Alan can only describe as a very tall, slender, human-looking man, around the approximate height of 6 foot to 6'6", pale white skin, a long and slender face, sporting very normal features, eyes, ears, nose, and a thin-lipped mouth, bordered with a very neat, shapely goatee-like beard, and was attired in a white gown of some kind and a skull cap atop his head. Alan doesn't feel uneasy, apprehensive, or fearful whatsoever with this man. He has a feeling of familiarity, as though they've met, and indeed know one another. The tall being displays a very neutral and serene expression, and seems to be helping Godfrey feel at ease, calm, and relaxed. Next, Alan is requested to lie down on a narrow bed. This message wasn't spoken to him by the being. Instead, Alan heard this impression in his mind and knew it came from the being stood before him. Alan understood without knowing how that this being's name was Joseph, and accompanying this biblical-appearing humanoid was a black dog that sat off to one side of the room, focused on Alan and never averting its gaze from him. Alan found the appearance of this canine striking, like no dog he'd ever seen before. It displayed an almost intelligent sentience in its brilliant eyes. The calm of this moment was shattered as 8 small creatures with large, lamp-shaped heads, large almond-shaped black eyes, and slim, almost frail-looking bodies entered the room and surrounded Alan and Joseph. Alan felt a swell of fear at the sight of these entities, and though he wanted to spring from the bed and get out of this situation, he was unable to. His body was completely paralyzed. The being Joseph could sense Alan's anxiety, and immediately, although Godfrey was terrified by these inhuman creatures, began to calm once more and focused on Joseph as the small beings began to attach electrode-like instruments with wires protruding down to the floor. Alan got the impression that the little beings were there to assist Joseph in the examination. To Alan, they seemed to act in a robotic fashion, without fluid movements, yet they weren't clunky or stiff. These smaller creatures resembled the Zeta Grey alien typically encountered in most abduction cases, and as with Joseph, their faces too expressed no emotion. The examination being performed, of which Godfrey has no recollection of the details, seemed to go on for several minutes, and Alan's stress levels begin to rise once more. The fear starts creeping back in every time he catches sight of one of the horrible beings moving around him. Joseph draws Alan's attention once more to calm him. The examinations are over, and Alan feels at ease and safe once more as the small beings exit the room, and Joseph proclaims to Godfrey that they will meet again in time. The hypnotic regressions come to an end. Alan rouses from the unconscious state and is back in the room with Norman, Mike, and the two psychiatrists, and oddly, he cannot consciously recall the ordeal he just recounted with regression. Godfrey was left with this unshakable feeling of confusion and further apprehension as the recording was played back to him. It was this point of watching himself recall the strange story, along with the visual display of clear discomfort and fear, for Alan was beyond disconcerting, in the realization that he couldn't remember any of it. For him, it was akin to a dream that he knew he'd had, but was completely unable to recollect any details whatsoever. Sadly, what is certain is that if anything, Godfrey was now left feeling increasingly unsure and bewildered by the regressions. Hoping for answers, clarity, and maybe some closure to what happened to him, instead, Godfrey now was left with a plethora of never-ending questions, and a lingering ambivalence leading to Alan to almost completely doubt if any of what happened under hypnosis really happened, or necessarily happened in that way. Alan began to theorize that it could have even been a dream of sorts, or perhaps some kind of hallucination. What is certain for Godfrey is the close encounter on Burnley Road with the 20-foot wide UFO absolutely occurred, as he can positively remember every detail in its entirety, including the majority of the night leading up to that event, as well as after the object vanished. The mid-1970s leading up and moving into the 1980s produced an unprecedented abundance of UFO abduction cases from all around the globe, making their way onto the front pages of newspapers and magazines, sparking a fascination and leading to later debates on what may have happened to Zygmunt Adamski and P.C. Allen Godfrey. The complexity of coincidences within this case as a whole bore fruit to a copious amount of theories put forward over the years, preceding the moment P.C. Godfrey's experience was leaked to the press. In regards to the Adamski situation, many have suggested that Adamski may have been assassinated by the Soviet Union's KGB, or, even more unlikely, that he had been struck by ball lightning. Injured, dazed and confused, Adamski wandered around, found himself at the coal yard, collapsed and died. This theory is nothing more than clutching at straws, as Zygmunt, having been struck by lightning, would have either been killed on the spot with insurmountable electric surge running through his body, or bordering on the edge of death. He would not have just gotten back to his feet and wandered around aimlessly. Adamski's wife, Lottie, initially suspected that her husband had been kidnapped and murdered for unknown reasons. 25 years later, the British UFO Research Association, BUFORA, conducted their own investigation, and during their interviews of Adamski's family, it was revealed that he had not in fact been looking forward to his daughter's wedding. Speculation had arisen that due to a family feud taking place, Adamski had been kidnapped, held captive in a shed, stripped, tortured, using battery acid, and finally suffered the fatal cardiac arrest. Upon this occurring, the perpetrator, in a moment of panic and desperation, drove 30 miles to Todmorden, gained access to a locked coal yard, and dumped Sigmund's body on top of the coal pile, without inexplicably leaving any trace of his being there. This was the conclusion of which Bufora had arrived. Why would someone who wanted to cause such serious harm keep them alive for so long and shave them? Why would they also attempt to treat the burns on the back of his neck with what was found to be a compound not recognized on the periodic table? Why the coal pile? A place so random and out in the open where it would be obvious that the body would be discovered very quickly and scrutinized under professional and scientific lenses. This theory doesn't hold up, and as mentioned earlier in the video, with little to no evidence in support of these suspicions, theories and Bufora's conclusion, the police investigators found no leads to anyone who may have had anything more than a mild disagreement with Adamski, certainly not to the extreme of hatching a plan to abduct and later dispatch the kind-hearted Polish native. Was the KGB capable of such methods of interrogation and abuse? Yes, indeed they were. Yet no evidence was found to support this hypothesis either, as no black mark or any kind of criminal record for that matter was found against Adamski, his wife, or the family. As far-fetched and outlandish as some of these theories may have been back in 1980 and still remain to this day, with all things considered, the possibility of Zygmunt Adamski's disappearance and subsequent unfortunate death being the result of a possible close encounter of the fourth kind is an explanation that cannot be disregarded and dismissed due to the more rational and skeptical theories notwithstanding uncertainty. Of course, it is not out of the realms of possibilities that Adamski may have particularly felt like going for a long walk to clear his head, with all that was going on in his mind at the time. The wedding, his pending retirement, his own health in need of assessment, and most importantly, that of his wife Lottie, needing time to think was nothing out of the ordinary. 30 miles from Tingley to Todmorden is a very long walk, with paper grocery bags full of shopping, whilst wearing his usual casual suit and tie. Plus, his shoes were not designed for that kind of a hike. If Adamski had indeed been on his way home that afternoon, of which, according to the shopkeeper whom last saw him, was the direction he was heading back in, how could he have possibly ended up 30 miles away in a town, as far as investigators discovered, Adamski had never visited? He owned a car, and with his failing health, coupled with the duty to Lottie, why did he not just drive there and back? Zygmunt was not known as a man who kept secrets to those that knew him well. So when it is stated that he had no friends or family in the Todmorden area, this fact should breathe sound logic into dismantling this hypothesis and assumption with regards to precipitate behaviour in human nature. P.C. Godfrey at the time was left completely bewildered by the nature of the Adamski case, going on to state some years later that he believed it possible that Adamski may have been abducted by someone or something. I am open-minded, I can't rule it out. Extraterrestrial beings placed Zygmunt in some kind of stasis, and upon being awakened, the shock of the situation, where he found himself and who he found himself surrounded by, may have been too much of a shock to the system, causing the heart attack from sheer terror. They may have tried to revive him, and when that failed, they returned Adamski's body and placed him on the coal pile. If this was the case, then this is the first documented potential alien abduction in which a human did not survive the ordeal upon return. This is a disturbing concept, and when other cases of bodies turning up horrendously mutilated are taken into consideration, such as the Guadaperanga Reservoir incident and the strange death of Sergeant Jonathan Lovett, a truly horrifying connotation lingers over this case. As for his memories of abduction uncovered by hypnotic regression, later down the line, the now former police constable Alan Godfrey would go on to postulate that the sessions may have been saturated in some way, as he had been reading about the case of Betty and Barney Hill that occurred in 1961, along with much research into the subject of close encounters and the levels of which they have been experienced. Godfrey had conducted this research prior to the regressions, and upon reflection felt that maybe his subconscious was simply relaying what he had read and learned between 1980 and 1981. For all intents and purposes, to Alan, these purported memories may have been the result of a multitude of factors spurred on and potentially amplified by the subconscious state hypnosis requires. The main pieces of what could be considered as at least some form of evidence in the argument of the involvement of extraterrestrial intelligences was that of the numerous other sightings from around the area of strange dancing lights. From the 3 police officers that were out on the moors in the middle of conducting their own duty, to another witness, that of school caretaker Leonard Smith, who had seen a bright zigzagging light over the same area where Godfrey was to have his experience only a few minutes later. Val Pilling, the landlady of the Deer Play Inn, a pub that sits atop the moors above Todmorden, and her husband witnessed a startling sight as a brilliant bright object came flying across the valley and lit up the pub car park right in front of their bedroom window. Then, without a sound, shot off in the direction of Todmorden. In later inquiries made by other ufologists, a futuristically designed house was uncovered to have been in Todmorden around 1980. Named the Futuro House, it sat perched on the back of a flatbed lorry and was pictured at one point being towed down the street. This round, grey, disc-shaped mobile home, similar in colour and sporting blacked-out oval windows, bears an obvious resemblance to a UFO. Immediately, the skeptics were quick to jump on this apparent revelation and declare Alan's case closed. In their hubris or blatant ignorance of the facts at hand, this house, for one, bears zero resemblance to Godfrey's sketch. The windows and shape of the craft are entirely different to the mobile home, the only similarity being that they are both round and almost close in size. PC Alan Godfrey was a professional police officer, and it was his job and duty to remain vigilant and alert at all times. He does not strike one as a man that would just make up such an experience, and for what? He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. His story has not changed in 41 years, especially under the skeptical eye of the mainstream media and general public ridicule. Alan knows what he saw. The unnerving, shocking, and still unsolved case of Zygmunt Adamski, coupled with the equally disturbing experiences of Alan Godfrey and the many other witnesses of that night, was only the beginning of a period of extreme high strangeness for the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, these 2 inexplicable accounts have not been re-examined in a number of years. Only a few documentaries surrounding the paranormal have featured the Todmorden incident in short. It is my hope that one day a new, serious investigation to uncover what really happened to Zygmunt Adamski will be opened one last time, so that his family may finally gain that elusive closure once and for all.
I must stress that I did see a UFO that night. Make no mistake about that. I definitely saw what I saw, and nobody on this earth will ever tell me any different.
Thank you very much for watching this episode. And if you're still with me as we take this descent down into the rabbit hole, please go and check out these following YouTube channels that are the inspiration for my work, Beyond Creepy and Bedtime Stories. Their content is phenomenal. I will also be linking the documentaries featured in this video in the description below. Whatever you believe in, see for yourself and draw your own conclusions. I hope to see you again next time. Until then, I've been your host, Agent D, and remember, always keep one eye on the sky.